Thanks so much. I'm going to be brief with the introductions here because I think we all want to get to the discussion after hearing what folks have to say. That's quite a spectrum from the two different types of studies. And Perry Nissen is next, who's CEO at Sanford Burnham. I knew him in a previous life where we had many interesting discussions about this topic. So I look forward to hearing your perspective now.
Thank you. So I want to speak about a topic that's come up several times already this morning, and that is with respect to access to patient-level data from clinical trials. And by disclosure, I'm a year away from almost 20 years in pharma, so I'm now unencumbered. I'm also severely green-red colorblind, but I'll keep to term. I don't think I need to tell this audience what the value is of making these data available. To maximize the contribution of the information and of the participation of the participants to knowledge, I mean, it makes great sense. What I do want to comment upon and ask you to consider is a point made earlier this morning, is to consider how useful information and data are collected to answer question A will be useful to address question B. And to what extent meta-analyses and post-hoc analyses and exploration of different things are going to be informative, to what extent they're informative, and how might they be useful from a regulatory point of view. I think those are unique answers to each of those questions. To confirm or refute hypotheses and findings is something I'll probably come back to, one of the more contentious areas, I would say, and something worth exploring. Something I think that, of course, these data and massive amounts of data are going to be useful for is to confirm and refute, for hypothesis generation, for methodology development, and something I argued for very passionately from whence I came about the transparency in reporting and building trust from a pharma point of view, I think are very important points, and that was certainly what drove decision-making from where I came from. We could spend the entirety of our time talking about all the reasons not to do and all of the electron beams of negativism that would discourage anybody from making those data available. Issues of privacy, of what kind of informed consent is relevant, how those standards, what the standards were for reusing those data, the cost of making those sorts of data available, which I will come back to. The issues of intellectual property were raised already before. Harmonization of data standards and being able to use those data. Who decides what is something we could come back to, and all the conflicts of interest. I could probably offer you 10 more reasons not to do, but these are some of the biggies. These are the ones that bothered me the most, me personally, that I thought were the most challenging. One is that issue of protecting privacy and confidentiality. I'll give you an example of where things started with GSK, but let me just summarize quickly something that I've learned from agencies and individuals who can go back to data and try to re-identify that which is anonymized or de-identified. With basically 2 points of information, if somebody is sinister enough and intends to re-identify somebody, they're going to be able to do that. So I don't think there's probably this personal view, any unequivocal way to permanently 100% de-identify information. It becomes altogether even that much more difficult when we start thinking and talking about rare disease. So I'll give some examples, and it's something to just keep in mind. But if the intentions are sinister, that is what's going to happen. Individuals could sign and say that they promise not to do so, but it cannot happen if that's the intent. To ensure that the data are used for valid scientific investigation, this was a biggie for me. I think it's problematic. One could imagine for a pharma to have litigators, hiding behind some putative investigator whose intent is solely to pursue that kind of intention, and that there should be some sort of scientific intent behind that. The challenge of erroneous claims of benefit or risk are not insignificant for a public health point of view. And that assumes that that data were not interrogated for risk and benefit appropriately in the first place. And I think that's, frankly, disputable. But again, time will tell. And I think the extent to which it does will validate and invalidate that. And something worth keeping in mind is the practicalities and costs of anonymizing data in formats that investigators can use effectively. I could tell you where I came from at GlaxoSmithKline. Millions and millions and millions of dollars were expended getting data in a place, proactively getting in a place that it was accessible and usable and available to others. I could only guess how challenging that would be at institutions that have academic institutions, for example, have all kinds of turnover and not necessarily a history or the data standards or ways of collecting those data, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that is a challenging, and it's not a no-brainer what the expense is to get data in shape and to harmonize it and to achieve standards where it is usable in meta-studies by others. So this point that I made earlier to you about can patient privacy and confidentiality be protected? So I'm listing here what GSK did in the first instance, and others do similar things to try to protect it. You could put it in a secure password protected site. You could have controls in place to prevent the data being downloaded or transferred. That's what they decided. You can make software available. You could download it into a safe place and potentially combine it. You could have data sharing agreements that say you won't do that, and you could align it with the informed consent. There's all kinds of stuff you could do to try to protect the information. But again, maybe one point for discussion, and the discussion is really what does that mean? But agencies like, well, when I was involved, where I was with MI5 or the CIA and those kinds of scary people have been abundantly clear that two little snippets of information, and sorry, we could figure out who that is. So just saying, something to consider. There are solutions. Again, I've raised all the issues, and this is somewhere where we took a lead and was very passionate about. You can have sponsors provide the data after completing a project makes sense. We thought it was important to have an independent custodian that could take a review and manage some of the issues that I said to you, and then investigators could come in and make those proposals. GSK, a couple of years ago, took a first step, had a data request site, an independent panel chaired by Brian Strom, who's in the audience, and an access system. And this is all available on the web that you can see. I'm not going to go into it in detail. Another step was taken about a year later where several other partners joined in into this a multi-sponsor request site. All of those pharma partners are listed here, and I'm gratified that so many have decided to join in, at least in part, and other companies have taken their own approach, Pfizer and J&J. Another issue I want to raise and something to consider is if there is an opportunity to have access to patient-level data, if there was a way to do that in a harmonized, aligned way, the opportunities for cross-meta-analyses, of course, increase, assuming that one can harmonize the data in a way to make it analyzable. And there is a multi-sponsor request site. There is, as far as I know, the same independent panel. There was lots of discussion. Should you just make it open access data? And for the reasons that I alluded to already, I didn't think that was a way to go. And there is a system for access. The two other points I want to make is I looked at, there is a website that's available. I think I have it in what I handed out, or you can ask me. I just took a look because there was a commitment to update. So what proposals come in, what gets approved, what's kind of happening out there. And in brief summary, I would say over the last couple of years, not much. And what I would suggest as a point of discussion, why isn't that happening more? Some of that may not be very well known that these data are out there. Another reason may be it's pretty hard to analyze and access those data. I know GSK had a concierge to kind of help through that, and it is massive amounts of information, and it's not trivial and not without expense. to be able to do so, and it requires somebody who's qualified mathematically to be able to access that. But not, or maybe it's just not that useful, and maybe there's just not that much to be done, which would be a little disturbing to me, but may be the case. Another small point that was interesting, I know from GSK, they loaded on a whole lot of studies, and you could go look and see all the studies that they listed. In terms of requests for studies and other studies, many more requests for much older stuff or stuff that GSK might have partnered with and didn't have access to the data. It's just sort of a curious point. And finally, I just want to suggest that where I guess I was hoping things would go to is kind of GSK got started, multiple institutions got involved. Ultimately, it would be great if there was one independent custodian who could manage this in a collective way, but addressing the issues of how it's going to be usable and how it's going to be affordable and who's going to pay for it is another question. So I think I've tried to raise for you a lot of the issues, a lot of the challenges, a lot of the opportunities. Certainly don't have all the answers. I'm gratified that progress has been made when people were just yakking about it, at least my entire career in pharma. So I think things are moving. I think there are opportunities. There have been some publications here that you could read about in terms of some of the details and opportunities and challenges behind that. And I am green-red colorblind, but I can see flashing, so I'm going to stop.